Back in college, I used to look forward to the 4th of July break way more than I probably should have. It was a tradition for me and a few close friends to head out to our friend Cam's lake house in Vermont. It wasn't anything fancy. 2 stories, wooden deck, a short walk down a slope to the water, and a tiny dock that barely fit 3 people standing. But to us, it was freedom. No parents, no curfews, no responsibilities for 3 whole days. The summer after my junior year, I remember the group being a little smaller than usual. A few people had internships or summer classes, so it ended up just being me, my roommate Alyssa, Cam, obviously, his cousin Trevor, and this guy named Ryan, who Cam had met through some outdoors club. I hadn't met Ryan before that weekend, but he was friendly, a little quiet, definitely more of the chill type. He had this sort of wiry frame, tan from hiking, and wore these beat-up Converse that looked like they'd been through hell. The first night was relaxed. We grilled burgers, drank cheap beer, and sat on the dock watching the sky fade from orange to deep blue. I remember feeling a little buzzed and letting my feet dangle into the lake water, which was colder than I expected. Ryan sat next to me for most of the evening, and we talked about random things, classes, music, how we both sucked at math. Nothing flirtatious, just easy. The next day was more typical 4th of July stuff. We drove into town for the parade, came back in the afternoon to start drinking again, and by sunset, everyone was kind of in that in-between state. Not blackout drunk, but definitely loose. Someone put on music, and we ended up playing a chaotic game of slip and slide beer pong on the lawn. That night, though, things got weird. It was late, maybe around 2 a.m. Cam and Alyssa had gone to bed, and Trevor passed out on the downstairs couch. I couldn't sleep and decided to take a walk down to the dock. I didn't even put shoes on, just grabbed a hoodie and wandered out. The air was warm, but not muggy, and the lake looked pitch black, except for the reflections of a few stars. I didn't realize Ryan was already down there until I got to the bottom of the slope. He was lying flat on the dock, staring up. He looked over when he heard me and kind of smiled, but didn't say anything at first. I sat down next to him. We talked a little about how nice it was out, how we both couldn't sleep. After a few minutes, I lay back too, arms crossed under my head. There was a long silence, the kind that doesn't feel awkward. And then, kind of suddenly, he turned on his side toward me and said, "Can I kiss you?" It caught me off guard. Not because I was uncomfortable, but because it was so direct, and kind of sweet in a way. I said yeah. We kissed for a bit. It wasn't fireworks or movie-style passion, just slow and kind of exploratory, like neither of us was in a rush. Then his hand moved to my waist, and he leaned in more, and I think we both knew where it was headed. I sat up and said, "Not here," and he immediately pulled back, nodded, and said, "Okay." We ended up walking back up to the house together, barefoot on the damp grass. The upstairs bedrooms were taken, so we crashed in Cam's little detached tool shed turned guest room behind the house. It had this old twin bed and smelled vaguely like cedar and motor oil. I won't go into graphic detail, but it happened. Slow, quiet, a little clumsy, but not in a bad way. Afterwards, we didn't really talk much, just lay there for a while, then eventually fell asleep. I remember waking up early, around 6 a.m., to the sound of birds and the faint ripple of water. Ryan was still asleep, one arm draped over my stomach. I eased myself out of bed gently, trying not to wake him. I pulled the hoodie back on and moved over to the small window at the side of the shed. I just wanted to catch a glimpse of the moon before the sun swallowed it. As I peered out, something immediately struck me. There was a silhouette. At first, I thought maybe it was a tree, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized the shape wasn't still. It was a person. A man. Standing so close to the window that his breath was fogging the glass. I jumped back instinctively, my heart in my throat. He was right there. His nose practically pressed against the pane, eyes wide, unblinking. And then, he smiled. His teeth were yellowed and crooked, some leaning in odd directions like they were too big for his mouth. The smile didn't reach his eyes. He just stood there, inches from me, staring. Then he lifted a single finger and tapped the glass. Softly. Just once. I heard him whisper, barely audible through the pane. "Hi, sweetie. Come outside." I screamed. Ryan jolted awake behind me, completely disoriented, and scrambled up from the bed. By the time he made it to the window, the man was gone. Just vanished. No sound of running, no branches snapping, just stillness. We both stood there in silence for a while, staring into the dark woods. Then we bolted out of the shed and ran straight to the main house. We woke everyone up. Cam, Alyssa, and even Trevor, who was groggy and hungover but alert the second he saw our faces. We all sat in the living room while I told them what I saw. I think the thing that got everyone really freaked out was how close the man had been. Inches. Just glass separating us. And the whisper. "Come outside." Cam looked pale, and Alyssa kept glancing at the back windows. Ryan stayed close to me the whole time. We ended up calling the local police. They sent someone out within 30 minutes. The officer was nice enough, but didn't seem to take it that seriously. He walked around with a flashlight, didn't see any footprints, probably because of the damp grass, and told us it was likely some drunk guy who wandered too far from another camp or house. Still, we cut the weekend short, packed up that morning, and left by noon. I didn't sleep after that. Not that night, not the next one either. I never figured out who it was or what they wanted, but that image, just a figure, watching us in silence with that smile, is burned into my memory more vividly than anything else that happened that weekend. It wasn't just a weird night. It was something that changed how safe I felt, even in places I thought I knew. Back when I was 10, I spent a 4th of July weekend alone at home. Not totally alone. My older sister was supposed to be watching me, but she got invited last minute to her best friend Rachel's lake house, and my parents were already out of town. They trusted me to hold the fort for a couple of nights, mostly because our neighborhood was quiet and safe. We lived in a cul-de-sac just outside a small town, where most families either left for the holidays or hosted barbecues that spilled into the street. That year, nearly every house around us was dark and empty. It was a Saturday night, and I remember that because the town had done their fireworks show the night before, on the 3rd. I'd already seen them with my friend Dylan's family, so on the 4th, I was just planning on microwaving some pizza rolls and watching cartoons until I passed out. The house next door, the Raymonds, was one of the ones that was empty. They were gone for the whole week, probably upstate at some family cabin. Their place was 2 stories, like ours, with big bay windows on the first floor and a wraparound porch. The kind of place you'd picture on a Christmas card. Around 10 p.m., while I was half asleep in the living room, I started hearing this weird, hollow banging sound. At first I thought it was someone setting off leftover fireworks in the woods behind our block. But the banging didn't echo or crackle like fireworks. It was too close, too solid. I turned the TV volume down and waited. Nothing. Then it came again. This dull thud, followed by the sound of something creaking. I stood up and went to the front window. From there you could see straight down the street to where the Raymonds' house sat. I remember my stomach sinking when I noticed their porch light was on. It hadn't been earlier. Then I saw movement. A figure, hunched, stepping through their front door. A second one followed, carrying something bulky in his arms, like a bag or maybe a piece of equipment. There was a third person too, but they stayed near the doorway, watching. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a cell phone yet, just the house landline, and I was too scared to turn on any lights in case they saw. So I went upstairs to my room, which overlooked the side of their house. I cracked the window just slightly and looked out through the blinds. From that angle, I could see them more clearly. They weren't wearing masks or anything, just hoodies and dark jeans. They moved fast and quiet, loading stuff into the back of an old SUV. One of them even opened the Raymond's garage and pulled out what looked like a big tool chest. That's when it hit me. They were robbing the place. Full-on break-in. I remember crouching below the window, heart racing. I didn't want to watch, but I couldn't stop either. It felt like if I looked away, something worse would happen. I must have stayed there for 10 minutes, just watching them work. Then, right as the last guy came out with what looked like a guitar case, he paused at the bottom of the steps. He looked over his shoulder, then turned completely toward my house. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. He stared for a few seconds, then tilted his head, like he was trying to make something out. And then, this part is burned into my brain. He raised his hand and pointed. Not just generally in my direction, directly at my window. I dropped down and crawled away so fast I scraped my knees on the carpet. I didn't look back. I didn't check if he was still there. I just ran to the closet and shut the door behind me, curling up between a pile of old shoes and my sleeping bag. I stayed there for what felt like hours. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no doors. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, it was morning and sunlight was coming in through my window. I didn't tell anyone at first. I was scared that if I said something, that guy would come back. But a couple days later, when the Raymonds came home, there were police cars out front. Someone else must have seen the SUV or noticed the broken door. I never told them what I saw. Never described the man who pointed at me. But for years after that, I kept the blinds in my room shut tight every night. Even now, I still think about how he looked right at me, like he knew I was there the whole time. I wasn't even planning to go anywhere for the 4th of July this year. Philly was already turning into a war zone by June 30th. Kids lighting off mortars in alleyways, car alarms going off every hour. I figured I'd just throw in some earplugs, make a stiff drink, and ride it out. Then, Tyler texted. He'd found this cabin near a lake in central Pennsylvania. Totally off-grid. Solar power. Water from a well. No cell reception. He wanted a quiet weekend with a few people. Just hiking, grilling, maybe swimming if the lake wasn't full of leeches. He invited me, Nina, and his cousin Jordan. I said yes mostly because I needed to get out of the city. We got there the evening of the 3rd. The cabin was nicer than I expected. Old, but well-maintained, with a deep porch that looked out over the tree line and a narrow trail that led down to the lake. Inside, it smelled like pine and dust. 2 bedrooms, a loft, wood stove in the middle, and one of those creepy black and white TVs that probably hadn't worked since the 90s. First night was chill. We played cards, grilled burgers, drank a little. Tyler tried to light a sparkler from a book of matches and nearly set his hand on fire. Nina rolled her eyes so hard I thought they'd fall out of her head. Jordan disappeared halfway through the night to smoke by the edge of the woods. When he came back, he looked jumpy. Said he thought he saw a bear. None of us took it seriously. 4th of July morning, we hiked out to a ridge overlooking the lake. The trail had a weird vibe. Overgrown, like no one had walked it in years. Lots of fallen branches, random scraps of plastic. At one point, we found a baby shoe half buried in the dirt. Nina just stared at it for a long time and muttered, "That's not normal." Jordan took a picture of it and said he was going to send it to some weird Reddit thread when we got home. I wish he hadn't. Later that afternoon, the vibe shifted. We were back at the cabin, starting dinner. Tyler was manning the grill. I was cutting veggies inside. Nina was napping upstairs. Jordan was missing. Again. Not unusual. He liked wandering off. But this time he'd been gone for nearly 2 hours. We started calling for him. Tyler yelled out into the trees while I walked down the path toward the lake. Nothing. No movement. Just that thick silence woods have right before dusk. I checked my watch. It was a little after 6. Around 7:30, we finally found him. He came stumbling up from the direction of the lake, soaking wet, barefoot, and shaking. We brought him inside, wrapped him in blankets. He wouldn't say much at first, just kept saying, "It wasn't a bear," over and over. Then finally he told us what happened. He said he'd walked down to the lake, planning to smoke and maybe swim. Said he heard voices. Thought it was us at first, even though we'd all been at the cabin. He followed the sound around the edge of the lake to this clearing. He said there were people there, but they weren't talking, just, standing, in a ring, all facing inward. No clothes. He couldn't see their faces. I asked if it was a bonfire or something. Jordan shook his head. No fire, no noise, just, standing, like they were waiting. He said he got this feeling, like if he kept watching, they'd all turn around at once. So he ran, slipped on the rocks, fell into the lake, and didn't stop running until he got back to us. I didn't believe him. Not fully, but Nina did. She pulled me aside later and said she'd seen something weird when she was upstairs. Figures in the trees, just beyond the clearing. Thought it was deer at first. Then she realized they weren't moving like animals. They were pacing. That night, none of us really slept. We locked the doors, closed the shutters. Tyler kept the fire stoked and sat on the porch with a hatchet he found in the shed. I had my camera next to me, thinking maybe I'd catch something if I looked through the lens instead of my eyes. Dumb thought, I know. At 3:13 a.m., the power went out. Not just the lights, the hum of the fridge, the whir of the ceiling fan. Everything. We waited. Tyler checked the solar array, said it looked fine. Battery indicator was full. That's when the motion light outside the cabin flicked on. We all froze. It was the only thing still working. The light lit up a patch of ground about 10 feet from the porch. And in that circle of light, there was something lying there. A dead fish. Still wet, still bleeding slightly from the gills. No sign of how it got there. Tyler walked out to grab it. Against our protests, of course. He picked it up, looked around, saw nothing. No footprints, no drag marks. Just this random fresh fish on dry ground, 50 feet from the lake. We stayed awake till sunrise. On the morning of the 5th, we packed. No one said it, but we all wanted out. Jordan was pale and barely speaking. Nina looked tired but alert, like she was waiting for something to follow us to the car. As we were leaving, I snapped one last picture of the cabin from the driveway. Just habit. 2 days later, back in Philly, I finally uploaded the photos. To cut it short, I wish I hadn't. In the photo of the cabin, just to the left of the porch, there's a person. Standing still. Wearing what looks like an animal's skull over their face. And behind them, deeper in the trees, maybe 4 or 5 more. Waiting.